In my last video about my all-time favorite launch coasters, I hinted at potentially making a video about the best individual launches I've experienced. Well, I've stuck by that because I really thought I'd have some fun with it. That said, I wanted to make things even more interesting, so today I will be sharing with you my top 10 favorite launches and first drops. The way this will be working is I'll be going back and forth between drops, launches, etc. Also, I have to touch on a couple things before we dive in. One, I have not been on every coaster on this planet, nor every coaster in this country. I'll be sure to update a lot of my list when I get around to riding more coasters, but for now, this is what you'll have to deal with. 2, this is all my opinion. I don't expect you all to agree with these rankings, but that's okay. I'd love to hear about what your favorite drops and launches are down below in the comments. Lastly, I have to ask of you guys to subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, as it seriously helps fight against the YouTube algorithm and it motivates me to produce videos like these. So I think that's all I have to say, so without further ado, here are my top 10 favorite drops and launches as of March 2021. Number 10 drop, El Loco at the Adventure Dome. Just barely cracking a spot on this list, the fun El Loco coaster in Vegas has a lot of wonky and weird elements. Out of the bunch, that first drop may very well be my favorite. One of the things that makes it so good is that you go into it with a bunch of speed. Prior to the drop, you enter a hairpin turn that feels very reminiscent of a Wild Mouse, and this is where you build up that speed. With this speed, you are absolutely yanked down this 90-degree or near 90-degree drop. There actually isn't an angle of descent released, but I'd be willing to bet from experience that it's vertical. Regardless, it's extremely steep and you are just tugged down it. Combined with the fact that you just have a lap bar holding you in, unlike most other El Loco coasters, this element is absolutely fantastic. Number 10 launch, Revenge of the Mummy's first launch at Universal Studios Hollywood. It may surprise you to see this on the list, but I was very impressed with this launch. I'm not sure if it's also like this on the Orlando or Singapore versions of the ride, but on the Hollywood version, you accelerate stupidly fast. That said, there is a caveat here. Just after you accelerate super quick, trim slow your train down and it's very noticeable in just about every seat on the ride. This is truly a buzzkill because the ride would be so much crazier if those trims weren't there. Another positive though, the launch sequence is great. I love the theming and how those two mummies or sphinxes or whatever they are drop down, as it really builds up some good anticipation. So the theming combined with the acceleration, even if there is a trim right after, makes this launch very memorable. Number 9 drop, Steel Vengeance at Cedar Point. I know I had to include this somewhere on the list. This drop is massive, 200 feet on an RMC, which is no small feat. That said, this drop is very straightforward, literally. For that reason, it isn't my favorite RMC drop by any stretch, but it's still a highlight of the ride and it's a fantastic drop. The sustained airtime on this element is the same fantastic sustained airtime you'll find throughout the rest of Steel Vengeance. Number 9 launch, Wicked at Lagoon. Unlike the other launches on this list, this one isn't on here for being powerful. Matter of fact, it's quite gradual, but what's so crazy about Wicked's launch is that it takes place up a 90-degree top hat. Most launches occur in flat sections of track, but Wicked's is very inclined, vertically inclined. The uniqueness isn't the best part of this though. The best part is actually the airtime you get while rising vertically. Yes, I am not joking. Ask anyone who's ridden Wicked and they'll tell you the same thing. It's the only coaster I've ever experienced that has a sensation quite like this, and it seriously helps the top hat out and being the best element in all of Lagoon. Number 8 drop, Twisted Colossus at Six Flags Magic Mountain. Just one spot above Steel Vengeance's drops, Twisted Colossus's drop is great because it combines ejector airtime and laterals. The track does go to the side a slight bit, but the laterals it gives off are very noticeable. What's also crazy about this ride is that it has two side-by-side drops of the same quality. Now, I'm not really considering that all one element since this list is about my favorite first drops, but it's something to be aware of if it's your first time riding. Getting to experience two phenomenal RMC drops in one ride is so great, I love it. Number 8 launch, Volcano the Blast Coaster's second launch at King's Dominion. While the first launch of this ride is also excellent, my favorite on the ride has to be that second one because of how much it caught me off guard. I rode this coaster in the front row and maybe that's why it was so crazy, but basically we were already going so fast following the first launch. Knowing that we had to be sped up even more to launch out of this volcano really got my heart pumping. By the time it happened, I was just shook. It blasted you up this vertical incline in the darkness right after accelerating you even faster. What a wild element, I'll really miss this. Number 7 drop, Maverick at Cedar Point. Cedar Point has 6 roller coasters that stand above the 200-foot height barrier, and get this, Maverick is not one of them. Standing at just 105 feet tall, this little drop tries its best to fling you into Lake Erie. The ejector on this drop is so strong, almost like a more powerful version of El Loco's, which makes sense because you also go into this one with some speed following that launch to Lift Hill. Let me reiterate though, this 100-foot drop is better than the 200-foot drop on Vengeance, 300-foot tall drop on Millennium Force, and 400-foot tall drop on Dragster. You did hear me right on that. The element is so wild. Don't believe me? Then give it a ride in the back row. Number 7 launch, Full Throttle's third launch at Six Flags Magic Mountain. Following Full Throttle's surprise backwards launch, you fall back into this tunnel with the third launch whose purpose is to give the train enough speed to clear the top hat. Well, it certainly achieves that, but man is this launch fast. It's less powerful than some of the others on this list because you already have a bunch of speed, but I cannot stress how fast it sends you through the rest of the layout. This is actually my favorite element of the ride, yes, ahead of the massive vertical loop, and easily it's my favorite launch in all of Magic Mountain. Number 6 drop, Hangtime at Knott's Berry Farm. It may be important to note that you should be in the back row if you want to feel all the power of this drop. Most coasters on this list are the same way, but this is especially true for Hangtime. It also helps that the drop is at the very beginning of the ride because it takes place before the restraints can come down any further. This drop is a great one because of its angle of descent and because you have some slight speed going into it thanks to that weird holding brake. At 96 degrees, this drop feels very reminiscent of Maverick's 95-degree drop, but I only put this one higher because it's slightly larger and therefore it lasts for a bit longer. Regardless, the strength of this element in the back row is crazy, and I'd recommend those seats for your first ever ride on Hangtime. Number 6 launch, Maverick's second launch at Cedar Point. I think I can speak for most enthusiasts with this one. Maverick's second launch is incredible. You start in this tunnel midway through the ride that has railroad-esque theming and sounds that really build up anticipation. Then you start accelerating to 70 miles per hour as this light at the end of the tunnel comes closer and closer to you. But the best part of this launch is at the very end of the launch track where the track banks super hard to the side and you blast out of the tunnel extremely fast. It's such an amazing experience and it helps this ride achieve its status as an elite roller coaster. Number 5 drop, Full Throttle at Six Flags Magic Mountain. Well, would you look at that, Full Throttle's taking up 2 separate spots on this list, excelling in both categories. Before we talk about this coaster's drop, I know this is an unpopular opinion. So many enthusiasts like to say that this drop is a buzzkill since there's trims on it. In my opinion though, the trims actually impact how much ejector you get. And yes, you heard that right, sit in the back seat and this drop off the top hat will give you some of the strongest ejector airtime anywhere. It's powerful as is, but at the last second, the trims shove you forward, resulting in a sudden dose of horrifying ejector. I'm surprised more people don't recognize how amazing this element is, but when the park reopens, I urge you all to try Full Throttle in the back seat and then you should get back to me. Number 5 launch, Stormrunner at Hershey Park. I was not expecting this launch to be nearly as strong as Xcelerator's when I first rode it, but much to my surprise, it was virtually just as good. Blasting through the trees as you accelerate at a very fast rate is fantastic. It did help that I rode this coaster in the front row for my first ride because today I stand by the front row being the best on every Intamin Xcelerator. I don't really have much to add, but I think I'll touch more on the sheer power when we get to Xcelerator. Number 4 drop, Cannibal at Lagoon. Unlike the other drops on this list, Cannibal is rather gradual and doesn't try to fling you into outer space. Instead, this drop is on here for its crazy steep angle. This ride's 116-degree drop is taken from 200 feet in the air, and believe me, it looks terrifying. These mind-blowing stats make this ride the tallest beyond vertical roller coaster in the world. Remember, this is from hypercoaster heights, so it seemingly lasts forever. That said, you do get a dose of mild ejector, and something funny that I like to do is duck my head at the drop so it feels like I'm getting upside down airtime or hangtime or something. But anyways, this coaster should be on your bucket list for this drop alone. It really is something else. Number 4 launch, the SNS Axis prototype at the SNS Worldwide facility in Utah. A very rare credit for many, this coaster is not at all open to the public, and therefore I was really lucky to have the opportunity to experience this ride. Everything about it was awesome, but perhaps my favorite element on the thing has nothing to do with the rotations that this model is supposed to be known for. Instead, what actually stole the show is that crazy powerful air launch that was actually my first ever air launch I'd ever experienced. These are powerful as heck, and the length of the launch track was super short on this ride, making for a very fast acceleration. Believe me, it looks good from off-road videos, but actually riding it was something completely different. Somehow, this launch raised my body up a little and then pinned me to the back of the seat, almost giving me some sort of airtime. It's honestly so hard to explain, but that just goes to show how powerful it truly was. And actually, the reason this prototype even has a launch is because of the airport right next door, so I wouldn't expect to see launches on permanent access coasters, unless a park specifically requests for one. We'll have to wait and see what happens, but regardless, I'm glad I was able to tell you guys about my experience on this awesome ride. Number 3 drop, Iron Rattler at Six Flags Fiesta, Texas. This drop is the closest in the world to Sky Rushes and is easily the best RMC drop I've experienced. It's like Twisted Colossus's drop, but it's on a much larger scale. Iron Rattler stands 179 feet, so this element is taken from pretty high up. First of all, you are already getting some serious ejector airtime declining this thing, but midway down, and yes, this is why I compare it to Sky Rush's drop, midway down there's this weird bump in the track that flings you further out of your seat and gives riders a dose of laterals. That's also why I compare it to Twisted Colossus's drop, since it kind of tilts a little bit. But yeah, if I could describe this drop as best I could, I would say that it's a combination of Colossus's and Sky Rush's drop, which is an amazing thing, I promise. Number 3 launch, Xcelerator at Knott's Berry Farm. It's a no-brainer that this launch is phenomenal. Everyone who rides Xcelerator will immediately point to the launch as their favorite moment on the ride. But how could they be wrong? This launch, especially in the front row, absolutely pins you back and accelerates you fast. From 0 to 82 miles per hour in just 2.3 seconds, this launch is one of the fastest accelerating launches on any coaster in the world. It's easy to see why too when you ride it. It's so crazy, guys, I can't explain it any better than that. This one element is worth the trip to Knott's by itself, and it's just a ridiculous moment. Number 2 drop, El Toro at Six Flags Great Adventure. I actually threw this in here at the last second because somehow I forgot about El Toro's drop when writing this script. Because of this, there are actually 2 coasters in the number 1 spot, but that's okay, it's my list and I can do what I want. As for El Toro, this is one of the best wooden coaster drops in the world. It's definitely my favorite, that's for sure. The fact is that it's so steep for a woody, it's pretty large as is, and it goes into it with some speed from that turnaround section. It gives off an immaculate burst of ejector airtime, which makes it one of the best drops in the world easily. Number 2 launch, Kingda at Six Flags Great Adventure. When people say Accelerator's launch or Stormrunner's launch is better than Kingda or Dragsters, I just scratch my head. If it's because you haven't ridden it in the front row, then go ride in the front row. It's a game changer. It's not the smoothest thing in the world on Kingda, even I'll admit that, but it's still incredible. The wind in your face makes this launch my second favorite launch and second favorite element in the world. There's just nothing like launching 128 miles per hour and taking all that speed face first, other than of course one other coaster, but we'll get there. And the number 1 drop, like I mentioned, is a tiebreaker between X2 at Six Flags Magic Mountain and Skyrush at Hershey Park. These 2 drops are very different, but are both my favorites undoubtedly. It's rare that I ever want to choose between them, but if I had to pick right here right now, I'm going with Skyrushes. Let's start off by talking about X2s. It should be obvious to why this one is so amazing. Because of how the ride works, your seats put you face first with a near 90-degree drop before performing a flip at the last second. It's a bit more gradual than some of the other drops on this list though, unless you're in the back row, which leads me into my next point. Ride X2 in the back if you want whip over the already chaotic drop. It'll leave you breathless, no doubt about it. Another drop that is a must do in the back is Skyrushes. Everything I said about Iron Rattler's drop can basically be applied here minus the laterals, but the air is way stronger. And it's crazy to say that because Iron Rattler's airtime on the drop is still fantastically strong. On Skyrush, it's a similar situation in that you already get some strong floater or a mild ejector down it, and then midway down, a bump in the track absolutely catapults you outwards. It completely launches you into the restraints. It's a ridiculous drop. That was my best attempt at explaining it in words, but it's very difficult to do that, and just give it a ride yourself, then you'll understand. Both of these are amazing though, and I hope you all get the chance to experience them. At last, my number 1 launch is Top Thrill Dragsters at Cedar Point. Ah yes, my favorite launch as well as my favorite coaster element I've experienced. This shouldn't have been a surprise, especially seeing that I put Kingda at the number 2 spot. Literally everything I love about that launch can apply here too. Only difference with the actual launch is that it's 8 miles per hour slower, but trust me, when you're going 120 miles per hour, you can't possibly feel a difference. The 2 reasons this element is ranked higher for me has nothing to do with the launch itself really, but just the way the ride runs. Firstly, it's smoother. I don't know why Kingda is considerably shakier than Dragster, but it is what it is. Also, the biggest reason are the restraints. On Kingda you have bulky over-the-shoulder restraints, whereas on Dragster you have a tiny little lap bar. This makes you feel so much more exposed, and it also gives you the ability to throw your hands up in the air and enjoy it even more. Honestly, all of these elements are some of my favorites in the world, and if you find yourself at a park that has any of these, I urge you to check them out and let me know how you like them. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed hearing about my top 10 favorite launches and top 11 favorite drops out of the 223 roller coasters I've personally ridden. As always, I'd love to see some comments flowing about what your favorite launches and drops are, and as well as that, a like and subscription would be greatly appreciated. Thanks again everyone, and I'll see you all very soon. Bye guys.